As someone who's covered Snyder and Gunn's 2004 remake of Dawn of the Dead multiple times on my channel, I've definitely heard from many fans of the Romero classic, and especially about how they genuinely prefer the original film over the modern adaptation. And I gotta be honest with y'all, I've never really seen the original Dawn of the Dead. I've seen Night of the Living Dead, and I've also seen Land of the Dead, but I've never actually sat down to watch what is one of Romero's greatest works. So guess what I ended up doing? That's right, I watched Romero's Dawn of the Dead in order to see if it truly holds up, especially when compared to its more contemporary counterpart. Now, here's a quick disclaimer in the spirit of intellectual honesty. I love Snyder's Dawn of the Dead, and it's certainly one of the zombie films which had a lasting impact on my childhood. So you could say that my analysis or comparison will definitely be tainted by bias. But let's be real here. Everyone has a bias, and being biased, in and of itself, is not ruinous to an argument or an opinion. Case in point, a woodworker may have a bias for wood when it comes to constructing high-rise buildings, whereas a steelworker might have a bias for steel. At the end of the day, the steelworker's bias doesn't negate the objectively verifiable fact that is the reality of building high-rise structures with steel, being that steel will always be better than wood for such a building type. So yes, I'm definitely going to be somewhat biased here, but that will in no way affect my analysis in any way that will ruin its integrity. After all, if being biased invalidates an argument, then no argument ever made would ever be valid. Plus, I would also be remiss if I didn't emphasize that this comparison is going to be largely subjective, due to the very nature of art itself. Anyways, with that lengthy disclaimer out of the way, let's get the ball rolling on this analysis by first covering the Undead. And then after talking about the zombies, I'll cover the main casts, the plots, the craftsmanship of both films, and the legacy of both movies, all before reaching a definitive verdict. So here's a quick warning for the Romero fans. I'm going to be somewhat blunt with my honesty in this segment. As a modern viewer of the Undead genre, it's very difficult to take the exceptionally slow shamblers of the Romeroverse seriously as an on-screen threat. They're not strong, there's not a ton of them to begin with, and they're even slower than the shamblers of the Walking Dead universe, which by the way were far nimbler in Season 1 and 2. They were more like fast shamblers if we're being honest. And let's be real here. Anyone who says the slow as molasses zombies of the Romeroverse are scarier than the super sprinting zombies of the Snyder remake are just snorting some strong as fuck copium. There is nothing, and I truly mean nothing, scary about a threat that Walt Jr. could outwalk. Now maybe if the undead were intelligent and coordinated, like they were in Land of the Dead, then I'd be concerned. But the zombies in Romero's classic are just pitifully and laughably unserious as a genuine on-screen threat. And no, I don't want to hear any bullshit-ass retorts about how creepy these shamblers are or how dangerous they are in large numbers. Like, guys, everything you could say for these sluggish Zeds is far worse and scarier when you're dealing with the hyper-athletic sprinters of the modern remake. That being said, the undead come to life regardless of how a person dies, clearly being the inspiration for the Walking Dead's wildfire virus. They also possess rudimentary instincts based on previous memories. So you can kinda see the potential for a genuine threat being there. But this is severely undermined by their lackluster physicality, piss-poor motor skills, sluggish movement speed, and low numbers. Now I'm sure this shit was revolutionary back in the 70s and that in itself cannot be discounted, but the idea that Romero's zombies are better is just not a respectable position. Romero's film isn't a comedy like Shaun of the Dead. It's both a horror film and a clever piece of social commentary. And the horror portion of that equation just doesn't work if the horror monsters in the film make me laugh instead of tremble in terror. Case in point, no one remembers Jaws because of the environmental subtext. They remember it because that juiced up shark scared the living hell out of them. And then they appreciated the film's deeper commentary about the time in which it was released. Now compare this to Snyder and Gunn's Undead Super Sprinters, which will run you down at a moment's notice. Even if you're decently in shape, they'll eventually catch you because they'll never get fucking tired. These undead freaks are also remarkably strong, smart enough to circumnavigate obstacles, all while being intelligent enough to climb and hold open doors. Now fortunately for the survivors of the remake, these Snyder sprinters do require that a person gets bit, or infected, in order for them to turn. But this nerf really doesn't lower their threat level in any meaningful manner. When I was a kid and I saw Night of the Living Dead, I really wasn't that scared. But when I saw Snyder's super sprinters, that shit had me suffering from nightmares, which is exactly what you want from a zombie action horror film. As such, the modern adaptation is the clear winner of this segment. When it comes to crafting a successful zombie story, one must get three things right, being the zombies, the characters, and the plot. And when it comes to the main cast of both films, one can easily see how such a comparison wouldn't be as one-sided as the previous segment. Romero's classic gave us a historically significant black lead in Ken Foree's Peter Washington, and also a historically impactful female lead with Galen Ross's Francine Parker. Peter's character arc is that of a SWAT team captain who experiences the emotional toll of the apocalypse, nearly opting to unalive himself before then finding the will to continue living. Francine Parker, on the other hand, is the fairly useless lady who eventually becomes pregnant, but despite all of this, she eventually learns how to fly a helicopter while also learning how to defend herself. While both characters undergo simplistic arcs, their stories are still effectively compelling, especially for the time in which they were released. But these two aren't the only characters in the movie who are entertainingly captivating. Stephen Flyboy Andrews is the helicopter pilot who becomes increasingly materialistic, and Roger DeMarco is the reckless and impulsive fool who gets himself killed, before he first develops a bromance with Peter. But if I'm gonna be honest with y'all, aside from Peter and Roger's friendship, I didn't really find myself being blown away by the original film's cast of survivors, which is kinda disappointing considering that we spend more time with them than the main characters of the Snyder Gunn remake. The 2004 remake's cast, on the other hand, was larger in scope and also had some memorable performances from better-known actors. Michael Kelly's portrayal of CJ alone is superior to any I saw in Romero's classic. Sarah Polley, Ving Rhames, Jake Weber, and Ty Burrell's performances as Anna, Kenneth, Michael, and Steve were also iconic. And by the end of the film, I felt I had a better understanding of Snyder and Gunn's characters than I did of those in Romero's version. But unlike Romero's more tight-knit cast, some of the characters in Snyder's Dawn sorta got lost in the fray, often serving simplistic roles, like that of eye candy or zombie bait. That being said, CJ starts off as being a selfish asshole, and eventually transforms into a selfless hero. Kenneth is very much the same, only really caring about his brother who we all know is fucking dead, until he then learns to care about the Milwaukee crew. Anna had to get over losing her man, only to then find love with Michael, a romance which had a bittersweet ending. Andre went crazy, Andy's friendship with Kenneth ended tragically, and every character at one point was given time to grapple with the implications of surviving the end of the world. The entire cast as a whole went from embodying the hedonistic material vices of the early 2000s to truly finding a reason to live, with the exception of Steve the Prick, who stayed a dick the entire time. All in all, I'd say this is a fairly close competition, but the fact that I personally felt like I knew Snyder and Gunn's characters more than I did Romero's characters is pretty damning considering just how focused Romero's film was on 4 characters, whereas Snyder and Gunn accomplished more compelling character arcs with a shorter runtime and a wider cast of characters. And I know this is likely a take that'll upset the Romero fans, but I gotta be honest, one of the stranger perceptions people have of the remake is that the movie is just a soulless adrenaline rush, when in reality, the film actually does slow down in the middle to let us truly live with the Milwaukee crew. This is further improved upon when we view the director's cut of the film. There's real substance that's truly being ignored here, whereas the substance in Romero's film is being overvalued or inflated unnecessarily by its fans. As such, I'd give Snyder and Gunn's remake the edge in this segment. Alright, let's be real here, guys. If you've seen a ton of zombie movies, then you'd know most tend to follow a pretty simple formula. Society collapses, survivors go on the run, survivors find a safe haven, and then they eventually end up having to leave said safe haven. Both versions of Dawn of the Dead follow this equation to the T. We begin Romero's film with our characters being at a news station. We get to see the chaos unfold on the airwaves, before then seeing the undead apocalypse unfold in person during a SWAT raid on an apartment complex. Eventually we see our core cast unite, before then flying to the Monroeville Mall. It is there that we see the cast clear the mall, before then succumbing to their consumerist inclinations and cabin fever. But these issues do not cause them to leave the mall of their own volition. In fact, what happens is that a motorbike gang forces them out of the mall. In Snyder and Gunn's remake, we get one of the best openings to a zombie film ever projected on the silver screen. We get hints and clues about the coming storm, before suddenly seeing shit hit the fan. From there we get one of the best title sequences in the genre, before we're fast-tracked to our primary filming destination, being the Crossroads Mall. And from there, our survivors end up succumbing to their consumerist, hedonistic inclinations, while then ultimately also falling prey to cabin fever. Except that we actually get a moral dilemma when the box truck survivors arrive. A dilemma which is quite basic but also far more interesting than what was present in Romero's film, which was no moral dilemma whatsoever. But in Romero's defense, Snyder and Gunn did give us this ridiculously stupid zombie baby.
What the fuck is this?
Romero did give us 2 sprinting zombie kids. I mean, sure, but the whole zombie baby thing was just dumb. Nevertheless, the group eventually leaves the mall when the cute but moronic redhead chick ruins their plans, eventually causing them to lose the mall to the Undead. We then get an adrenaline-filled escape sequence followed by a somber ending, only to then see them all die in the end credits scene. As far as I'm concerned, that's a pure chef's kiss moment that's truly in line with the film's tone and general atmosphere. Now, as you can see, both films have a similar plot, and this really makes determining which is better a fairly difficult task. Although I can see the merit in arguing that Romero's film had the better plot because the main cast's departure from the mall wasn't contrived. But to be fair to the remake, staying at the Crossroads Mall was never a sustainable long-term solution. Whether their departure was due to human error or dwindling resources, they would have eventually had to leave the mall. Be that as it may, perhaps we can determine the winner of this segment by comparing the depth of each film's social commentary. But even with this metric, we run into a similar issue. Snyder and Gunn's remake offer a remarkably similar, but modernized commentary on American hedonism and consumerism. It also clearly highlights humanity's tendency to ignore problems until they cannot be ignored any longer. The Milwaukee crew literally wastes an entire month just living the high life at the mall instead of actually attempting to optimize their survival. Whereas in the Romero classic, we see a clear commentary on American consumerism and egoism. Roger gets killed because of his ego, and so does Flyboy. Almost everyone in that cast falls prey to materialistic temptations at the Monroeville Mall. As you can see, there really isn't much of a difference between the two films. Even the Undead are used as tools of social commentary.
Why are they coming here?
Memory, maybe. Instinct. Maybe they're coming for us.
What are they doing? Why do they come here?
Some kind of instinct. Memory. What they used to do. This was an important place in their lives.
Yeah, the original film gives the Undead a little bit more personality, and the slow shamblers really help to sell the point of the film. But the comically speedy sprinters really do embody the more modern sentiment of wanting to live a life of ecstasy, constantly seeking instant gratification. The only real difference here is that the 2004 remake's commentary is often downplayed or completely ignored, whereas the original's is treated as something more than what it actually is. Given all that we've covered in this segment, I honestly can't pick a winner. Hence, I declare this segment to be a clear draw or stalemate. So I'm just going to be straightforward with this segment. Comparing the craftsmanship or the production quality of both films is an unfair comparison, as the modern remake is clearly of a better quality. But I will say that Romero likely accomplished more than Snyder and Gunn, given the shitty $640,000 budget he had to work with. We're also talking about the 1970s, where computer-generated graphics weren't really a thing in most movies. One cannot understate just how remarkable Romero's work was for the time, literally pioneering the practical effects of the Undead genre. That being said, at the end of the day, the modern film just looks better and was also both directed and written better by the dual talents of Zack Snyder and James Gunn. The remake, as such, has superior pacing with a runtime of just 101 minutes and 110 minutes for the director's cut, whereas Romero's film was far slower in pace, to the point where even my dad was wondering when the film would fucking end. Romero's film literally has a runtime of 127 minutes or 2 hours and 7 minutes. The Snyder adaptation or remake also focused heavily on practical effects, while also giving audiences plenty of Easter eggs. The news helicopter from the original film, Ken Foree's TV cameo where he repeats his iconic quote from the original movie, Scott's cameo as a military general, Tom Savini's hilarious cameo as the local sheriff, and even the Galen Ross store Easter egg. The DVD bonus content is also amazing, with the newscast special and Andy's Lost tape being must-watch media that's freely available on YouTube. The newscast special itself influenced plenty of future EAS videos on the internet, and Andy's Lost Tape was somewhat ahead of its time, really predicting how people would document calamities in the future through the use of social media and their phone cameras. No doubt about it, the remake easily clears this segment. Plainly stated, there's just no competition here in terms of legacy. Romero's film defined a genre and inspired countless films, TV shows, and books. It literally raked over $66 million in profits, on a budget of just fucking $640K. Snyder's remake had a budget of $26 million, going on to gross $102.3 million worldwide. Romero's film literally had an ROI of 10,312.5% with a profit margin of 99.04%, meaning for every dollar earned, 99% of that was a profit, whereas the remake only had an ROI of 293.5% with a profit margin of 74.6%. When adjusting for inflation, Romero's film would have grossed $209.9 million in 2004 dollars, literally outperforming the remake in raw dollars. There's simply no competition in terms of legacy, but having a greater legacy does not, at the end of the day, make a film better than another. The P-51 Mustang has an incredible legacy as a fighter plane, but we all know it gets dog-walked by the modern F-22A Raptor, and just about every other active fighter today. Despite this clearly being the case, no one can deny the impact Romero's classic had. As such, Romero's original Dawn of the Dead is the clear winner in this segment. Given all that we've covered, I think it's pretty obvious which film is the better of the two. Snyder and Gunn's Dawn of the Dead is just superior to Romero's classic. And to be frank, the only reason people feel Romero's film is superior is precisely because of nostalgia and admiration for the OG King of Zombies himself. But these are not solid reasons to really place Romero's film above the modern remake. Yes, the remake does stand on the shoulders of a truly magnificent giant, but because it does stand on these shoulders, it still stands taller. Snyder and Gunn's film just has better zombies, arguably better characters, and is certainly better in terms of production quality, writing, and pacing. It really isn't much of a competition once you take off the boomer glasses. And no, I don't prefer Snyder's remake because I lack nuance or patience for a slow burn. Like, Season 2 of The Walking Dead is my favorite season of AMC's adaptation, and that's literally the slowest, most deeply character-centric arc in the show's golden years. For a film to truly hold up today, standing the test of time, it has to be a film which modern audiences can truly appreciate, without ever having been raised on said film. And I just cannot honestly say that Romero's Dawn of the Dead holds up as a serious piece of social commentary or horror media. Compare this to Ridley Scott's Alien, released 1 year after Romero's film, or George Lucas's A New Hope, released a year before Dawn of the Dead. Both are old, both are timeless, and can genuinely be enjoyed by modern audiences. And I'm more than confident in claiming that Snyder and Gunn's Dawn of the Dead will be enjoyable to audiences 20 years from now, whereas Romero's work isn't really something I can ever see myself rewatching more than once. And that, to me, really makes this verdict conclusive for me. Anyways, if you like this sort of content, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Click the bell as well, that way you may be notified when I publish a new video. And also remember that you may opine anytime if you feel so inclined, down in the comments section. I'm Captain Gold, and I hope to see you in my next Gold Standard video.